Man, I love Kirby games. Yeah, big surprise, I know. From their colorful and detailed worlds to their surprisingly complex mechanics, every game in the series always puts me in a good mood. Okay, 90% of them put me in a good mood. On that note, there's been something missing from these recent Kirby games. And no, I'm not talking about any of this stuff. I'm talking about something that started all the way back in the first Kirby game, but just kind of fizzled out after the 2000s. If you haven't guessed already, I'm talking about... Yep, the short 5 to 10 second cutscenes. At the beginning of each world in these classic Kirby games, the player is treated to a skit of Kirby just goofing around, having fun, or just living out that relaxing dreamland life. Usually a mixture of the three. And, despite their brevity, I think they're a super important part of these classic games and should definitely come back for the newer ones. Now, before you call me Kirb crazy, hear me out for a sec. Why do I think these cutscenes are so good? Well, before I answer that, I want to ask everyone a question. Who is Kirby? Or rather, what exactly is his character? That's easy, right? Pretty much any Kirby fan will say something along the lines of, he's a silly little guy, a well-meaning hero with a big appetite and an even bigger heart to match. And yeah, for the most part, I agree. But would you really say a lot of that is expressed during the actual game? I mean, don't get me wrong, I think the developers did a good job at making Kirby an expressive character, especially for the time. After all, the animations and gameplay show a lot of the traits I mentioned earlier. The way Kirby flies and inhales looks kinda silly, filling in that goofy part to his character. His power-ups and items are all food related, so he's gotta be a glutton too, right? And all of his strange natural abilities are somehow really effective, making him an unconventional hero. But at the same time, I don't really think that this gameplay is enough. Because if you're purely looking at the gameplay, you can kinda get the impression that Kirby is kind of a monster. Just look at that neutral stare as he obliterates everyone and everything in his path. He feels so distant sometimes. And you know what, look, I can't be completely unfair. After all, the games make it pretty clear that Kirby's the good guy here. In Kirby's Dreamland, the manual says he's trying to get the stolen food back from Dedede. And in Kirby's Adventure, the opening text says he's trying to fix the Star Rod to bring back dreams to Dreamland. At the same time though, these instances are kinda separate from that main experience. Because for most of the actual game, for most of the time we're spending with Kirby, we're smashing our way through everyone and everything as Kirby blankly stares through it all. And you know, it's not like characters around this time were known for being super expressive, but I also feel like the Kirby devs really wanted to go that extra mile, and that's why I assume they made these cutscenes in the first place. They really didn't need to make them, like, at all, but they went ahead and put in the effort anyway. And check this out, they even made sure the music syncs up with the cutscenes. This effort really paid off, because they take the character we're hinted at from the gameplay, endings, and manuals and flesh him out in a fun way. Kirby isn't exactly a perfect hero. He can be a little absent-minded, and occasionally a little clumsy. He usually spends his days indulging in simple pleasures like fishing, eating, and sleeping. To put it simply, he's clearly not some kind of galaxy-wide bounty hunter or mythical warrior who's destined to save the universe. Or at the very least, he doesn't act like it. He's kinda just a regular guy. And yet, he's always able to take his opponents by surprise with his impressive resolve and unique abilities. When he's in a pinch, you can bet your maximum tomatoes that he's gonna do something that only he would be able to pull off. No matter how weird or how strange, it usually ends up working out. And of course, he has that gluttonous side. Kirby's usually shown to be a relaxed guy, pretty much always wearing a neutral expression on his face, but man, he can sure get worked up over food. These cutscenes may be short, and you know, just shy of 10 seconds long, but we really do get a better idea of Kirby's character through them. He never tries to put up a front to seem more than what he is. With him, it's just what you see is what you get, and that only makes him all the more charming. His innocent attitude, persevering through all the enemies he fights and the worlds he goes through, is what makes his relaxed outlook on life so powerful. He could just be helping a friend find their way home, or he could be storming a massive battleship loaded with explosives and lasers. It's all done by that same Kirby. He's a straightforward kind of guy, and that direct, straight to the point part of his character leans toward his courage and turns that empty blank stare into a persevering expression that never falters, no matter what enemy stands in his way. And this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. The cutscenes, the moments of gameplay, the manual, and the opening and endings of these Kirby games. When they all come together, they paint the whole picture. Like I said, Kirby isn't your typical hero. He's a little goofy, pretty unconventional, and that big appetite of his might distract him from time to time on his adventures. But it's the fact that, despite being a character whose main power is to change, and despite the fact that he's always running around in new worlds and fighting new enemies, he always stays the same. He's always the same Kirby, he never changes who he is. And that's what really makes Kirby a hero. Because no matter how bad things get, no matter what form Kirby takes, you can always expect gourmet racing, warp star riding, fountain dreaming, fish inciting Kirby to come in and save the day. In his own goofy little way, of course. Oh, and speaking of fish inciting, we gotta talk about Shimamura's games. Or, as everyone else likes to call them, the Dark Matter trilogy. Kirby's usually characterized as a friendly guy, someone who could make friends easily and with anyone, even his enemies. But in these older games, we don't usually get to see that much. Or, at least in Sakurai's games anyway. Aside from some Dynablade chicks here and some helpers there, Kirby isn't really shown being super friendly with everyone. This is, in part, because Kirby's very independent. While he is a character that's more than fine with receiving help, he very rarely asks for it directly. If he thinks something is wrong, he doesn't wait for others, he jumps straight into action with reckless abandon. The combination of his courage and straightforwardness are what make him stubborn, but that's something we can get into another time. Point is, he doesn't really wait on others to make a decision, leading to his many solo adventures. I'd also imagine it's just easier for the developers since story and character and that kind of stuff take a backseat to the gameplay. It just isn't really the main focus in a lot of these games. But hey, this is where the Dark Matter trilogy really shines, because now, friendship is a central mechanic of the game, meaning the developers can have more of a chance to expand on this side of Kirby and a little more on the world beyond him. For the short cutscenes in Kirby's Dreamland 2 and 3, everything established about Kirby in the other games is kind of amplified here, since there are more characters to bounce off of. In fact, Kirby being around his friends seemed to cause him to open up a little more, from openly smiling much more often to getting into short bits of childish anger. The goofy antics Kirby gets up to are only brought out more thanks to the company of his buddies. The last game in the trilogy, Kirby 64, does something a little bit different, but still with the same idea. Instead of short cutscenes at the beginning of each world, we instead get longer cutscenes at the end. While I do prefer the old structure and characters, I do really appreciate seeing a bigger focus on stuff like camera direction and set pieces. Plus, having the cutscene at the end serves as a nice closing for the journey each world takes you on. Even on different planets, Kirby and his friends still find a way to have fun and be themselves. Part of the reason I'm making such a big deal about Kirby's character and his friendships is because I don't really like how they do it in basically every other Kirby game. I know I might piss some people off with this, but just hear me out for a second. Even though the promotional material and box art and the story and all this other stuff make the characters out to seem like great friends with Kirby, they don't really do much beyond that. To me, it usually feels like a lot of the games are telling us that these characters have great bonds with Kirby without actually showing us. And it especially sucks because these games usually have stories that rely on the connection both Kirby and the player have built with the Fred character for their respective games. For each big climactic ending, I'm usually left feeling a little hollow because said friend character and the bond they formed with Kirby usually fail to make a meaningful impression on me. This could probably be a whole other video down the line though, so I'll just drop it for now. Well, actually, there is one exception. Surprisingly enough, out of all the games, Epic Yarn is the one that kind of follows the 64 format with its cutscenes. There are differences in the way it's handled, like for one, the cutscenes are treated more like children's storybooks, so there's a narrator and he actually speaks Kirby's lines of dialogue.
This grass feels funny, Kirby thought. It feels like pants.
Which, might be the first time we've actually heard Kirby have any sort of in-game dialogue. Well, except for... Anyway, for those who don't know, this guy here is Prince Fluff, Prince of the Yarn World Kirby's isekai'd in. He acts as Kirby's Player 2 companion for the game, and okay, I'll be honest, he's not exactly the most interesting character-wise. He doesn't even have any crazy lore or backstory attached to him, so he's simple even by Kirby standards. At the same time though, I think he's one of the best Kirby companion characters just because we actually get to see him and Kirby interacting throughout the adventure. And all they're doing is simple stuff, hanging out and eating food. But really, that's all that's needed, just something small to show that these characters are friends and actually enjoy each other's company. Epic Yarns even got Kirby's character down to a T too. Even though he's been sucked into another world with no foreseeable way of escape, he's more concerned with helping out a new friend. There's even this moment here where Fluff gets a little overzealous trying to show Kirby the ropes of this world, in classic isekai fashion might I add, and he accidentally hurts Kirby in the process. Then, just like in Kirby's Dreamland 2 and 3, Kirby shows his childish side when he gets angry at Fluff and chases him around, forgetting that he was even hungry in the first place. Even though there weren't really a whole lot of these cutscenes between the two, it's still enough for me to feel like there's a legitimate bond. We actually get to see this near the end of the game when the two learn about what the villain, Yin Yarn by the way, has been doing to Dreamland while Kirby was preoccupied with helping Fluff. This is where Fluff says,
"Be careful, Kirby. Yin Yarn is one mean piece of string. He'll be fine. After all, I'm going with him," Fluff said.
I like how it's treated less of a "you helped me, so I help you" situation and more like "I just want to make sure my friend is safe." It's one line of dialogue, but it's a nice touch to show their friendship. When we finally reach the ending, where it's time for the two new friends to part ways, Kirby and Fluff are actually sad to part. And it actually feels warranted because of the time we spent seeing their friendship. Again, like I said, it really isn't much, it's just two goofballs goofing around for the most part, but that's all you need for a simple friendship. The only real problem I see with these cutscenes is that they can feel a little long, in part because of the narrator. While I do think the silent way the other Kirby games handle it is better, I'm fine with it for this game since it fits in with the atmosphere. Plus, we got lines like this out of it, so I think it's totally worth it. With all that being said, there's a reason why Kirby snuggling up against a smelly sock at the end of the game is so heartwarming.
Some shade. He dozed happily with wonderful dreams and held the reminder of a dear friend, even though it smelled a bit.
As you can see, I really like it when we get to see these brief moments of the characters hanging out. It's really simple, but because the game bothers to show us the characters casually doing stuff together, I'm actually able to picture them spending time together beyond the scenario of the game, and being genuine friends, not just because the plot said they were. Their bond doesn't feel like a sudden development for these games, it feels like the norm. These cutscenes are just a small window peek into that norm. The cutscenes really just speak for themselves, honestly. Kirby and his friends aren't just goofy and laid back, they enjoy being that together, and that's what makes their bond as friends feel so strong. And you know what? I'm gonna do a bit of an aside here to talk about Dreamland 2 and 3, because it feels like the characterization of these cutscenes was translated directly to the gameplay, in the ability combos. Like I said before, Kirby and his friends are laid back, so they aren't exactly spending their days training to hone their skills. A lot of the time, copy ability combos can end up leading to some pretty goofy results, from turning into a feather duster and spikes coming out the wrong end. And of course, this kind of thing is amplified for Kain, who's usually treated as the butt of many of the jokes in the cutscenes. His copy abilities usually backfire on him one way or the other, from getting electrocuted by a light bulb to him getting frozen in a block of ice. On the other hand, a lot of the other combos usually feel less like attacks and more like Kirby and his friends are just having fun. When Kirby uses Spark with Pitch, he's able to control him around like a remote control airplane. Parasol with Choo Choo lets the two swing around like a teacup ride. Ice and Rick have the two cozy up into a snowman. For all of these, there's a sense of sincerity. Kirby and his friends stay true to themselves, and the fact that they still show their laid-back goofball nature while saving the day only makes them all the more endearing. Before I finally move on from these games, I want to talk about one cutscene in particular, from Dreamland 2. Just like all the others, it's short, but it says so much about Kirby. We already know that Kirby gets a little worked up around food. There's literally a cutscene in this very game showing that. And yet, without a second thought, Kirby's completely fine with sharing a snack with someone else. And before you guys mention it, yeah, in the very first Kirby game, Kirby gives back an entire castle's worth of food back to the people of Dreamland. But I feel like that's a little bit different. It's not as personal. I mean, giving someone back a stolen object is different from giving them something that belongs to you. Kirby's quite literally in the middle of eating his apple, but he's still willing to chuck over the whole thing to Kind. And to add a little to it, I'm gonna approach a little bit on theory territory here. This might just be me, but it kinda looks like this is the first time Kirby's ever met Kind. For the record, I don't think these cutscenes are all supposed to take place during the events of the game, mostly because of this one cutscene from Kirby's Adventure, where Kirby's dreaming here even though you supposedly can't dream without the Star Rod. Anyway, Kind pops in out of nowhere looking like he's asking for a quick bite. Kirby wastes no time and tosses it over without a second thought. Right after, Kind jumps up and gives Kirby a ride as thanks, funny as it looks. Bam! Just like that, they're friends. It's a small 10-second cutscene, and yet it shows so much about Kirby's character. He's easily able to make friends, and despite how much he loves food, he's able to prioritize other people over his hunger. I hope I did a good enough job of explaining why I think these cutscenes are so important to Kirby. They're able to show us more about Kirby's character than the gameplay and manual can do alone. Okay, before I finish this video, there's one thing I want to ask everyone, and it has to do with why I want these cutscenes to be brought back. What does Kirby fight for? And yeah, this might seem like an obvious, simple question, but I really do want to hear everyone's thoughts, so please put it in the comments below. Is it for food? Is it to go back to sleep? Is it because he has some sort of moral code and it's the right thing to do? Or is it to save his friends? To save everyone? And while I do think everything I said is a factor into the answer, my answer to the question is this. And this, and this, and this too. And you might be thinking, Star Warper, you think Kirby fights because he likes to rickroll? And you'd be right. But it's more than that. Kirby fights for these cutscenes. Sure, these might be tiny snippets of Kirby's character and world for us, but for Kirby, his friends, and the rest of the pop star denizens, this is their everything. They're in a world where they can live life however they please. Sleeping on clouds, playing all sorts of games, or just passing the time with some fishing. It's all done without a care in the world. Kirby's home is quite literally a dreamland. And this is why Kirby jumps into action, no matter how big or small any disturbance is. To be frank, Kirby doesn't always need to involve himself in every situation that he does. There are tons of moments where he could just easily ignore the stuff that doesn't really concern him and go on about his day. But how is he supposed to play with his friends if they're in trouble? How is he supposed to make new friends if they're in distress? How is he going to take a nap if Dreamland isn't lazy? How is he going to enjoy his snacks if they get stolen? How is he going to have a good night's dream if the dream fountain isn't working? It's all these things, everything that makes up his laid-back, normal, day-to-day life. All these little cutscenes that we see is what Kirby is fighting to keep, so that every day he can live his life as true to himself as he always does. And I know I dissed the other Kirby games earlier, but I don't want to make it seem like modern games don't understand Kirby's character at all, because they definitely do. Certain themes that were in earlier games are still going strong in the modern ones, like in Forgotten Lands. That easygoing Dreamland lifestyle isn't just a part of Dreamland, it's a part of Kirby and the rest of the Dreamland denizens too. Just like with Kirby 64, Forgotten Land is able to show us that, even far from home, Kirby and his friends are still able to find a way to fully enjoy the simple pleasures in life. Even in a completely new world, nothing really changes. It's just, what they did with these cutscenes was so good it feels like a waste to not include them in these later games too. These cutscenes can't take that much effort to make either. These short few seconds at the beginning of every world are a fun passive reminder of who Kirby is, how strong of a bond he has with his friends, and most importantly, that easygoing, everyday life that he fights to keep. Here's hoping the developers implement these back into the game soon. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and share with all your friends. Stay tuned for more videos like this one.